This MMA 30 segment is powered by The Gun Store. Next time you're in Las Vegas, if you want to shoot a real machine gun, do it at The Gun Store at 2900 East Tropicana. Welcome back to the MMA 30 Radio Hour. Our special guest in studio for this segment is Megan Olivi from Heavy.com. What's up, Megan?
Hello, guys. How are you?
For those of you that don't know, Megan is my co-host on Fight Day, which is a show that we do before every major UFC event. We're going to be traveling to Denver in just a couple of weeks for UFC 135. You looking forward to that card?
That's going to be a great card in the title fight with John Jones and Rampage Jackson. I cannot wait for that. I think there's going to be some fireworks in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, especially with all of the allegations of cheating and all the words that they've exchanged leading up to this point. UFC 135 is going to be a good one in the main event, but then the co-main event with Koscheck coming in as a late replacement for Diego Sanchez. That fight, I think I actually like a little bit more than I like the Diego Sanchez and Matt Hughes fight, although I was looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you. And I like Josh Koscheck as a fighter, and he hasn't been back since that fight with GSP, which was, 9 months ago?
Yeah.
So it'll be great to see him back in the octagon and see, did that have an effect on him mentally, too? Because we know he broke his orbital and he was out for a long time. But, how's he going to rebound from that fight? Because he got destroyed, basically, with one punch. You got jabbed to death.
What do you think? I mean, what do you think? What if Hughes beats Koscheck? What happens then? I mean, Koscheck's coming off a title fight.
I think that Hughes still has at least one more fight to go. I mean, you'd think that if Hughes, especially if he does it in an impressive fashion, that Hughes may get the winner of Nick Diaz and BJ Penn at UFC 137.
That's not a title eliminator yet?
No, I don't, because everything that's going on with Nick Diaz, which we're about to dive into here. But yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think they've made anything official. I think there's a lot of speculation about it, but I don't think Dana's come out and said anything.
Well, let's talk about that. UFC 137 is the big news this week. The entire card came unraveled. We went to a press conference on Wednesday down at Mandalay Bay, and basically the main event was supposed to be George St. Pierre and Nick Diaz. They were supposed to show up at the press conference, say hello to everyone, kind of get people excited. The whole point of doing the press conference is that tickets were going on sale, so they wanted to make people aware of that. However, everything fell apart when Nick Diaz didn't show up for his second press conference that week. This one here in Las Vegas was the final straw. He didn't arrive in Toronto the day before like he was supposed to. And then on Wednesday, he wasn't in Las Vegas, and so Dana White made the executive decision to pull him from the fight card. He said, you're not going to be fighting George St. Pierre in the main event of UFC 137 for the UFC welterweight title because you're not fulfilling your press obligations. Everyone at the press conference was flabbergasted. Were you shocked, Megan?
I wasn't shocked that he didn't show up because everybody knows how the Diaz brothers are. They do what they want. They really don't care. I mean, they don't care. They don't care about rules. They don't care about authority. They don't care whether they make money or not, obviously, because this fight was for a lot of money. Dana White said life-changing money. And, I wasn't surprised that he didn't show up, but I was surprised when Dana said, he's not fighting in the main event and we have a replacement. Here he is.
It's an interesting dynamic what the UFC has going for it. There's a lot of people who are talking about, well, this would never happen in boxing, and this would never happen if Aaron Rodgers didn't show up to the post-game press conference after a Green Bay Packers game, or this wouldn't happen in the NBA. David Stern would just find these guys into oblivion and still let the thing go on. But the difference between the UFC and all these other major sporting organizations, not that the fact that the UFC is still in the minor leagues, the UFC is moving up and playing with the big boys, as we've seen with their deal on Fox. But the interesting thing is the UFC is owned by one person, what those other major leagues are not done. They are unable to do. The NFL is a collection of owners. The NBA is a collection of owners. So is Major League Baseball. The UFC is owned by one entity, Zuffa, which is run by the Fertitta brothers and Dana White. And what Dana White says goes. You don't screw over Dana White. Nick Diaz needs to learn to kiss the ring on occasion. It's great and all, and he's really endearing to those Stockton fans by, don't be scared, homeboy. We get it, man. You're tough, but you got to play the game if you're going to be a professional. Dana White and Zuffa will not accept that if you don't. They smacked Brock down, and Brock is arguably one of the biggest superstars in all of sports entertainment, be it wrestling and or mixed martial arts, and he got slapped hard by Dana White after his ordeal with Frank Mir, after he started talking about Bud Light.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that you have to play by the rules in the UFC. And I was talking to Megan about this right before we came on the air. I think that Nick Diaz was simply testing the UFC to see what he could get away with. When Nick Diaz decided to come over from Strikeforce, or when they decided to bring him over from Strikeforce and give him this opportunity to fight George St. Pierre, Dana said that he brought him into his office, sat down with him and said, do you want this? Do you want this or not? And Nick Diaz said yes. And then Nick Diaz signs the contract. They start promoting this fight. It's going to be a big deal. It's announced to the world. And then Nick Diaz says, you know what? I don't really feel like going to a press conference. I'm not going to go to a press conference. I think I can get away with it. Turns out that he can't. I think the UFC set the right precedent. It's not that you have to come kiss the ring necessarily. It's that you have to live up to your word. If you give me your word, if you sign a contract that say you are obligated to do media, you have to do media. Just like in the NFL, if you don't feel like doing media, tough. If you decide not to show up, they'll fine you. That's a little bit different than in mixed martial arts because it is such an individual sport. Can you imagine if night of the fight, Nick Diaz just decided to not show up? What would happen then?
And who's to say he wouldn't do that? Diaz is a pretty spiteful guy. If he didn't feel like fighting, he probably wouldn't fight. And then the entire event is screwed.
Exactly. And because it's such an individual sport, it has to be carried a certain way. And yes, these fighters get a certain amount of money to show up, and then they also get a certain amount of money to win. And if he doesn't show up, then obviously he would get no money. But at the same time, it's like, Nick Diaz, would you put it past him? I mean, Dana White said at the press conference, he's promoted 1,600 fights, over 1,600 fights in his career, and this sort of thing had never happened before. So was it shocking that Nick Diaz didn't show up? Of course it was shocking. Was it shocking that Dana White and the Fertitta brothers pulled him off the card with such quickness and had the replacement ready to go? I would say that surprised me a little bit.
I was blown away that Carlos Condit was named a replacement that quick. And the thing that even that struck me as a more of a shock, we thought that Nick Diaz was going to be out of the UFC, and I'm so glad that they made the decision to keep him under the Zuffa umbrella because he is a top 5 welterweight in the world. And they with the signing of Alistair Overeem now, I mean, we're missing, the UFC and under the Zuffa umbrella, you're missing pretty much only one premier fighter. And even that guy isn't fighting top tier guys. You're missing Hector Lombard at middleweight. That's it. Outside of that, the Zuffa banner has every top 10 fighter in the world.
Well,
in the lightweight divisions and up.
Well, I mean, you could make an argument about Fedor Emelianenko still, and
no, you drop 3, you're out of the top 10. I'm sorry.
Well, okay, but Dan Henderson.
Dan Henderson's under the Zuffa banner, though.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I mean, he's over in Strikeforce.
But he will be. We had the writings on the wall that he's going to be coming over to the UFC. It is. There's some bad blood business wise between Dan Henderson and Dana White, but I think they're going to make it work because Dan Henderson's a marketable guy.
Well, you say the thing about Dan Henderson. What about Gilbert Melendez?
Well, he's still under the Zuffa banner, though.
And Gilbert trains with the Diaz brothers. So it's like if somebody from your camp can show up and do all this press, take Jake Shields. He fought GSP. He said, I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, West Coast time, to do these radio shows on the East Coast. I hate it. It interrupts my training. But I did it. The Diaz brothers, it wasn't like this is a big shock to Nick. Oh, where's this coming from? He saw his teammate do it.
Yeah, he's had to do press before, and yes, the press commitments with the title fight and when you're fighting George St. Pierre are greater. But here's the thing. If George St. Pierre has to get on a plane and interrupt his training and fly down from Canada, you certainly have to get on a plane and fly over from Stockton.
That whole 45-minute flight.
That 1 hour and 23-minute flight, you're going to have to suck it up and do it, bro. That's just how it works. So if George St. Pierre, arguably the biggest superstar in all of mixed martial arts as far as his crossover ability, the amount of money that George St. Pierre has, GSP doesn't need to do anything at this point. He could retire right now and be very well set, but George St. Pierre told both of us after that press conference that he does this because he's a man of his word. He takes his word very seriously, and even though he doesn't love doing the press, in fact, he actually said he hates doing all of the press and interrupting his training, he does it because he's a man of his word. He takes what he says very seriously, and he also considers this part of the job to be a challenge to him, and so he wants to tackle that challenge and do it exceptionally well.
At the press conference earlier this week, there was actually some kind of, GSP kind of spoke frankly, we don't get to see him do that a whole lot. When he said he doesn't like doing this, it was kind of a candid moment, I thought, and kind of gave George a little bit more personality.
Well, the entire press conference, I thought, was the most candid press conference that we've seen from GSP in years.
Absolutely.
And the reason why is because it wasn't the sort of press conference where he's getting bombarded with the exact same questions over and over again. And we've seen that more and more in mixed martial arts over the past couple of years. A lot of the fighters have canned responses because there is a lot of reporters covering the sport now. They're getting asked the same questions over and over again. And so they'll just kind of spit out their pre-rehearsed, whatever it may be, answer to any given question. But GSP and Dana White at that press conference, I found it to be wildly entertaining because they were both just kind of going off the cuff and saying whatever came to the top of their head.
Yeah, we saw Dana answer the phone during the press conference and talk to Cesar Gracie right in front of all of us and say, okay, well, I was just on the phone with Cesar Gracie and this is what he said. I mean, that would never happen in another press conference.
Totally honest moment.
And there you have GSP laughing hysterically, at certain things Dana's saying. And we always just see GSP the robot, GSP with the perfect answers, like you said, who wears the nice suit and says everything correct. And this time we see GSP just going, am I getting punked? Am I on that TV show?
It's like, is this a joke? Is he going to walk out any minute now?
Yeah.
I wish they would have brought a cutout of Carlos Condit, though, for him to face off with at that press conference.
Like breaks through the screen.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I thought that press conference was missing, to be honest.
Well, it was an entertaining press conference. However, what happened the day after the press conference, possibly even more entertaining. We find out that Nick Diaz is back on the card. He is not going to be facing George St. Pierre. Instead, he is going to be facing BJ Penn, Carlos Condit's original opponent. I think that we're split on this one. How we feel about it. Nick Diaz being back on the card, love it or hate it. We'll talk about that in just a moment here on the MMA 30 Radio Hour. It's Dave Farra, Jason Mahoney, special guest Megan Olivi in studio. We'll be right back here on 100.5 FM News Radio KXNT. This MMA 30 segment is powered by The Gun Store. Next time you're in Las Vegas, if you want to shoot a real machine gun, do it at The Gun Store at 2900 East Tropicana.